Hello and welcome to today's Tech Talk webinar, Presidio's monthly technical forum that showcases the industry's hottest topics. Today, Presidio's distinguished engineer and senior solutions architect, Andy Richter, will be presenting on Cisco identity-based web policy. We please ask that you remain on mute during the session and use the chat box for any questions. Also, following the webinar, you will receive a feedback survey. If you could take a moment to complete it, you will be qualified to receive a Presidio travel mug and a Starbucks gift card. Thank you again for spending this time with us, and I am pleased to introduce you to our presenter, Andy Richter.
Thanks, Monica. Appreciate the kind intro there, and thanks for all of you for joining the webinar today. So my name is Andy. I've been at Presidio for 10 years now. In the past, half of that time I've spent primarily focused on security, and a lot of you guys on the webinar I do know me and heard me say in the past that one of the things that I really want people to get out of deploying products with us is to use them in conjunction with one another. I want you guys to get your money's worth, and I truly don't believe that it is a smart thing for us to deploy a single IT product in a silo, right? So we want to have bits and pieces and components fit together in a unified system so you can take advantage of the data and the components of one system sort of across your entire IT infrastructure and to get the most out of it. And one of the places that I kind of find that to be most effective is when we combine the identity-based solution in a lot of these networks with web security, right? So when I say identity, I mean, in this case, I'm going to talk about Cisco ISE, the Identity Services Engine, and how do we use the Identity Services Engine to provide us functionality and features to create a web policy for us. And the web policy meaning, protecting users from going out to sites that they shouldn't go to, from a malware perspective, and preventing the users from getting out to sites and applications that we don't want to get to because it violates our policy or it violates our requirements for compliance, or we don't want them to waste their time. So we want to use the ICE stuff in different products that are available to us. And I want to talk about Firepower, and I want to talk about WSA, because those are the two big Cisco products. I'm probably also going to touch a little bit on Palo Alto, because you certainly can do some of this stuff with Palo Alto, but in 45 minutes, I can only do so much. So also, those of you who know me know that I love questions. I love a little tangent. So if you guys see me say something or click something, or you say, I'd like to know a little bit more, or Andy, can you expand on that? I have the chat window open. That's this gray box right down here in the corner. So if you throw a question in the chat window, I'm going to try to take a look at them. And Monica will be watching the chat window, and she can jump in and say, Andy, you missed something. Or there's 100 questions there, Andy. I want you to just go back and get through them. So anyway, here's my agenda. Let's start off talking about ICE. I want to talk about a little bit about authentication methods and sort of how do we gather the data what we would end up using in identity policy. How do we get that data into Firepower and into WSA? And then we'll talk about when we get into Firepower and WSA, so how do we configure a little bit of that to give you guys some ideas about what we can use that data for and how do we create a policy. And I want to talk sort of on both sides about the access policy, meaning how do we configure policies to say you are or are not allowed to get to stuff on the internet, and also the decryption policy to say, how do we use this data to make a decryption decision, and why does that matter, right? So I only have a couple of slides. You guys can see I'm up to 6 slides here for the total number of slides in the deck, and I want to spend most of the time here kind of walking through the screens in ICE and Firepower and WSA so you kind of see what it looks like, right? So let's get right into this, guys. So what are access policies? Just a quick review. We want to be able to permit and deny users connectivity to stuff. Stuff meaning websites, web applications. We want to also know who's doing it so we can report who they are. So, and when I say not identify users, I want to identify not just the users, but what kind of devices are they coming from, because it can make a big difference. And so when I say what kind of devices, I mean from a few different perspectives. I mean, is this device a corporate asset? Or is this device a device that is a non-corporate asset, and is it a mobile device? Why am I getting a Windows virus detection alert? Great, thank you, bye. So it is important to know both what people are connecting with and who they are, and then what are they connecting to? What is a URL? Is it, are they going to CNN? Are they going to ESPN? Are they going to Playboy? What are they allowed and not allowed to do any particular time of day? And are they using a web app? In a web app, I mean, like, are they using Netflix or Hulu or something like that? And are they allowed to do that at any particular time of the day? Maybe they're allowed to watch Netflix at their lunch break. Maybe they're not. And do we want to put any kind of aggregate limitation on that web usage? Because we don't want them using up all of our corporate bandwidth with Netflix. Maybe we're allowed to use some Netflix, right? Maybe that's required for some people to have some time to unwind at work. Maybe they're sleeping at work. Maybe like a hospital with interns are allowed to kind of like hang out off shift. Or maybe that's totally not allowed. And if you want to do that, you might want to also place the specific time limits. So then reporting is important because we want to know who's doing what, where, when. For a bunch of different reasons. Maybe HR always likes to know what these things are. If someone gets written up for doing something they're not supposed to do. If we might have a regulatory requirements that says we have to know who's doing what where. If someone is doing a lot of PCI stuff and they're in a PCI environment, it might be that they're only allowed to go to very specific websites they're whitelisting, and then you're going to blacklist everything else. That's a real important requirement to keep in mind. And maybe your management just has an arbitrary corporate policy that says, we're going to be very restrictive or very lax for our internet access. And that's just kind of the way it is based on what the ownership structure of the business says. That could be arbitrary. Life is not fair. If the business is paying for internet as a corporate resource, and the business owners are welcome to kind of set their compliance requirements the way they like. Ssl policy, I want to kind of jump in there real quick. It is important to have, in my opinion, it is underrated. The most important thing for most corporations to think about is how are we going to get visibility into what is encrypted traffic going across your network. And that's important because, one is bad guys use encryption now. It is more and more common to see malware using HTTPS. And if you really want to know what your users are doing from a low level, you're going to have to get visibility into their traffic. And the only way to do that in any meaningful way these days in a corporate PC is to implement decryption. So when I go into a customer and we start talking about Ssl decrypt, the first few questions I talk about are these first questions. So who are the people that need a decryption policy? And that's typically employees. What kinds of devices are we going to implement a decryption policy on? Also, most commonly, corporate assets, corporate laptops, Windows and OS X. And then what URL destinations or applications are we going to decrypt? And you can decrypt a lot or a little depending on your taste. Those of you who've heard me talk about Ssl decrypt before will know that, my favorites are typically things like social media. I really like to decrypt Facebook and Twitter and web browsers if possible. I'd love to decrypt web ads because it's kind of like the ad services are like a wild west. It's kind of a mess out there. And, web-based email, decrypt people's Gmail sessions, decrypt their Yahoo sessions on a PC because if someone's going to, try to exfil data out of your corporation, it's low-hanging fruit for someone to say, hey, I'm just going to log into my Gmail and throw that, corporate PDF file into an email to myself, and I'll just have it there. We want to have visibility into that. So again, why do we decrypt? File visibility is a big one. We want to see what's happening where, what kind of files are passing through, and it's part of that malware detection. So if someone's going to download malware, it's entirely plausible to use an HTTPS website. And then the last thing is application identification. And when I say application identification in the context of Ssl decrypt, I mean, I want to know with kind of a more fine-tooth comb what someone is really doing inside that Facebook session. Because maybe I can see that they're going to facebook.com based on the URL destination and the certificate they're using, but are they doing just browsing Facebook? Are they doing Facebook chat? Are they doing file sharing? Are they doing messaging? Are they playing Facebook games? Because maybe I don't actually care if a person browses Facebook at work. Maybe that's not a big deal. It's probably not a big deal. But I really don't want them using Facebook chat on the corporate laptop or Facebook file sharing. And because Facebook is encrypted, HTTPS, we can't get visibility into what they're really doing under the hood until we pull that SSL session apart. So now how we do it, just a quick review. It is a man-in-the-middle attack, meaning that we are going to have a proxy, or in this case, a firewall or a proxy in the middle of the HTTPS session, and we're going to decrypt it at the firewall or proxy and then re-encrypt it when it goes across the internet, which means that the client has to trust the certificate that we're using. And that can break us in a couple of ways. One is if it's not a corporate PC, it can be difficult to distribute that enterprise PKI to those devices because they're not trusted. We can't manage them. We can't necessarily push them a CA certificate. And also some of the applications they use just simply actually don't cooperate. They're like children. They do things their own way. And there's a couple of ways that stuff can get broken. One is if it's a device, if a application is cert pinned. Cert pinned meaning the application will only work if the certificate issued by the vendor is what's recognized by the application. So a couple of big ones are like Windows updates require cert pinning. So if you try to decrypt Windows update traffic, Windows update will not work. Same thing with the Facebook app on your iPhone. So if you try to do SSL decrypts on your iPhone, but you are using Facebook and you try to decrypt social media, the Facebook app simply will not work. Another example of something that doesn't work is what's called client certificate authentication. So if an end device is trying to use a client certificate to do authentication, not a username and password, you can't do like a man-in-the-middle decryption with a client cert. Just the SSL protocol does not allow for it. So a couple examples of that might be like the WhatsApp app does a certificate authentication. Actually, I think that Dropbox, the Windows Dropbox app does too, but that might also be cert pinned, so don't quote me on that, guys. But there are things out there that do certificate authentication that you don't even necessarily know about. So the reason I'm saying all this is because these are things you want to keep in mind when you're setting up this stuff, because you want to give your users both a good experience and you want to provide sort of a strong policy for yourself, so that if a person has an iPhone and you want to allow their Facebook app to work, that's great. But maybe in the same subnet you have Windows PCs and you want to decrypt their Facebook application. You've got to make that distinction between those two endpoints so that you can actually give yourself as much security as possible without ruining the person's iPhone experience. Because I have an iPhone, I'm talking about it now, and I use Facebook. And if Presidio broke my Facebook, like, it wouldn't be the end of the world, but I would be annoyed, and I might even open a help desk ticket to complain. So anyway, how do we kind of do some differentiation here? So the ICE can authenticate devices and provide us contextual information on what those devices are. So the basic idea is if you're going to do a .1x or a web authentication, we will know who the user is because they've authenticated with the username and password. ICE can take that data and put it in its database, its session database. And ICE can also take data about its profile. So profile meaning, what is this device? Is it an iPhone? Is it an Android? Is it neither? And based on that, it can develop what's called profile information, and that information can be provided to other applications inside your network. In this case, we're going to talk about Firepower and WSA, of course. ICE can also apply tags to the device. They're called security group tags. A lot of you guys have heard about TrustSec. Tags are one component of TrustSec. So if we have an authorization policy, say we have a policy for guests, And the policy says if it's a guest flow and it's doing wireless, we'll give it a permit access because it's on the guest ID for guest. But we're going to give it a tag called guest. These tags are created kind of arbitrarily, and we can add many more of them, kind of for whatever kinds of devices that you want. If you have a BYOD device, you can create a BYOD tag and apply those tags to all the different devices that you've identified kind of as mobile devices. Other tags that I'll often use are things like, is it an employee device? So is it a device that is owned by an employee? So I might write a policy that says like, is this thing doing, yeah, thanks, ICE. Is it doing like wired H21X? And is it doing ETLS? Because if those two things are happening, it's probably most likely that it's a corporate device. I'll throw a tag on it that says, this thing here is an employee, and I'm going to say, hey, look, permit access on it. Nice and simple policy. So how do these Hey guys, sorry, my phone dropped. I'm not sure why. Maybe it didn't like the policy I just created. So, Monica, you mind just throwing in the chat that you can hear my audio? I saw your chat that said my audio was lost. Good? As? Indifference.
You're good.
I'm good. Thank you, Monica. You're good too. Thanks, Dan. Appreciate it, buddy. So we created this policy. So you can kind of arbitrarily create tags and apply tags to all the different kinds of devices you have. And if you want to create more based on your use cases, all you got to do is hop over into ICE TrustSec components and see all the groups and tags you created. So these are the defaults, and let me just add a couple more because those of you who have seen demos before will know that anything that can happen bad in a demo will always happen when you configure stuff. But I'm going to do this live here because it sounds like fun. So let's create a tag for HR because like you might want to create web policy for human resources, and we'll create a tag for execs. As execs are cool, and you can put an arbitrary icon. The icon is kind of what might make it look pretty, and we'll add one for Monica. And we'll give Monica lightning bolts because that's cool. Okay, cool. So we've created some tags. And then how do we get the tags? The easiest way to get these tags to WSA and the Firepower is through what's called PXGrid. PXGrid is an API that works between ICE and other stuff including Cisco products and also potentially non-Cisco products. So we're going to look at these two today, but you can also think maybe I want to distribute some of this metadata over to Infoblox or Splunk or Checkpoint. You can distribute a lot of this data to other applications. The question is just, does the application have something to do with them? So what does this look like? You basically create some certificates on your endpoint devices that I'll kind of skip, and then you register them. So in this case, you can see we have Firepower registered to our ICE here. These are the capabilities. So we're sending to Firepower. The interesting data for me is the session directory. So these are the live sessions that are out there, plus the TrustSec metadata. This stuff is the tag information. You can also see that we've sent out endpoint profiles. So this is all the actual profiling data. Is this thing an iPhone or a printer or whatever? WSA subscribes to less data, not for any particularly good reason, but in this case, it subscribes to the session directory and the TrustSec metadata. So if you have other applications out there and you're saying to yourself, why does Checkpoint have TrustSec metadata in it, but it has session and maybe some other stuff? Well, it's because it itself doesn't ask for it, so some of the data may or may not show up there. But ICE will provide it for it if it asks for it. There's the idea. So what does the policy look like? What can we do with some of the stuff? So let's hop over to Firepower first. And let's create a access control policy. Actually, there is already one here, but we'll add some rules to it, and we'll maybe use some of our tags here, right? So say I want to create a rule that says I'm going to allow a BYOD to get to social media but I'm going to maybe deny somebody else's access to social media. So let's write a couple of quick rules to do that. If our lab system will let me do that. Come on. Bueller. I swear I'm clicking it, guys. Can I wait? Is it going to cooperate? There we go. She's coming. The thing that always kind of gets me doing demos is it would also surprise no one that I don't have the fastest lab system. So your production system would plausibly work faster than this thing. So okay, let's write BYOD is allowed to go to social media. So let's select the social media URL category, right? Let's add this to the rule, and let's say we're going to allow a particular tag to go to social media. So hey, look, we got execs. They're allowed to, because they can do whatever they want. And HR is allowed to go to social media because like we like them. We'll throw this into our demo rule set, and then just create sort of your normal policies you have for firepower. So we're going to like log it, subject it to IPS, and all that stuff. So we'll create that rule. So that's cool. So that thing's allowed. And that rule shows up here. But say we want to say, we're going to block Monica from doing stuff. So we're going to say Monica has been spending too much time on Instagram. So we're going to say social media for her is blocked. So into our rule of how to identify Monica, grab her tag. It looks she's right here. And say action is block. And we'll like log her data. But she's not allowed to get to social media. And then that policy shows up down here. And again, how do we map Monica's user to this tag? We would just say if her username is Monica in her radius authentication, then attach her to this tag listed in ICE. Okay, so let's save this policy. That's wonderful. And let's do the same kind of stuff in WSA. So kind of wherever she potentially goes, we'll make sure that the executives or HR are allowed to go to social media, but she's not. So if we hop over to our WSA, we create an access policy, kind of same thing here. And let me grab my login to this guy. Now, if I thought ahead, I would actually probably make Monica log in and try to browse to social media in the lab here, but I'm pretty sure she's working from home, so I won't put her on the spot. Here we go, access policy. So let's add a policy. Bueller, here we go. So select our ICE tags in our policy here. Our tags will load up from ICE. Hey, look, we've got HR and execs. Add these two guys. All right, cool. So we've selected those two tags. Done. Bueller. Come on. There it goes. So it's funny, I just lost the audio again, but I'm back. And I'm pretty sure at this point it's Monica kicking me off for picking on her here. So we've identified these guys. We'll submit this guy. So those two users with this policy anytime now. I definitely need a fast WSA. Anyway, we could write a policy. I'm not gonna waste everyone's time here on the WebEx because I got 20 minutes of your time when I want to get into this message. Oh no, it's working. So we go through every single step to do this. But the idea is, well, when you create these tags, they show up here as the identification information inside these products, and you write the policy. So here we go. So here's the social media allow. We'll create a URL global policy. And let me see if it'll let me do it fast enough. It's like some people think that the implementation of this kind of stuff is like super difficult, and the reality is that to my taste it's just not. So everybody here is allowed. Actually, yeah, and we can say social media specifically in this case is in the list there, and it's allowed. In this case, it's named social networking. I don't know why they haven't sort of updated that to be consistent, but they haven't. And you could do a bunch of other stuff here. Let's save this guy, and let's just make our quick Monica policy so you can see that we can create the different distinct policies there on this guy. Transferring. There we go. And we'll just add our other quick policy. Select our tags. And look, we got tags again. So we got the lag here. Let me kind of jump back a little bit. Let's talk about SSL policy. So how do we configure and identify devices to do SSL decrypts in Firepower? Because like I said, we want to know what we are able to identify and then what do we do with them. So, and there's advantages and disadvantages in doing SSL policy in Firepower versus WSA. One of the things that Firepower does not do yet is that you can't actually implement a source policy based on that TrustSec metadata yet. And when I mean I've heard Cisco's roadmap it just doesn't exist yet. So that means you can create a policy based on user group membership, meaning is this thing a member of a particular Active Directory user group or a particular subnet, but you can't pull the tag data down in the SSL policy today in Firepower. But you certainly can inside WSA. Well, not stick until I added Monica to this tag. Or is it my Firefox that's the problem? Could be my browser, guys. So let me talk through this. So what does that mean? The challenge in Firepower in implementing an SSL policy is to identify the devices that you then cannot easily do a decryption action to. Well, we can identify the users based on the user mapping. We can't say this BYOD doesn't do SSL decryption well, so we have to exclude that. But what you can do is create a policy that says this source subnet can be subject SSL. Well, this source subnet may not be subject SSL decrypt. And that's kind of important because when you look at BYEs, you can often put them on that separate subnet, but it means you have to take the due diligence to segment your devices that can potentially do SSL decryption differently. Right? But once you kind of have that, then the kind of the same rules apply when you're creating this policy. Just say this particular subnet, if it's a member of a particular Active Directory group, can be SSL decrypt, while these particular subnets or these Active Directory groups may not be subject to that decryption policy. And that can be pretty arbitrarily configured, you know? So you can say all AD groups are subject to decryption, while maybe a particular user is exempt. Let's just take a quick look at what the policy might look like over here. And when I say there are advantages to the WSA policy, in that the WSA decryption policy can actually take into account the TrustSec metadata, meaning the metadata developed from TrustSec can use the tags in your SSL policy. All right, cool. So that thing took. Those of you who know me also know that I'm not known for a lot of patience when I'm working in these browsers. So if you see me click happy or jump back and forth, it's because I want to get as much of this policy done in the next couple of minutes as possible to give you guys as much value as I can. This, either browser or FMC, just doesn't want to respond. All right, so we got Monica back in our access policy. Let me just hop back here and make sure I get her policy in the authorization access policy. Is not then allowed to browse social media. That was the policy I wanted to implement. There we go. So URL filtering. Give this a select all for all monitor, meaning I want to log everything. In our case here, social networking is going to get blocked. Submit. Not wonderful. So this guy not getting cooperative here. So let's hop over and configure the SSL policy to accomplish some of this stuff on the WSA. See, my FMC here doesn't seem to want to cooperate. So let's create some decryption policy. And let's add a policy. So we know Monica, wherever she is, we want to know what she's doing. So we'll grab her tag right now. But then we'll go ahead and exempt the executives from SSL decrypt, because executives, you know, they have opinions about things, and we'll just make sure that they're then exempt. That's wonderful. I got my first question. Here we go. Dan, if we want to use ICE to segment certain devices, say a mobile device that uses MAB and a Jackal, can I use SGT to get to a Palo Alto to only allow it to manufacture a website for the library update and deny it to everything else? Is that possible? So the answer to that, Dan, is with Palo Altos today, you cannot use that TrustSec metadata because there's nothing built into the Palo Alto today that will do that IP to tag mapping in the Palo Alto. That being said, if you were to search on GitHub under some projects for a Palo Alto project called MindMeld, there are some development efforts around that to basically take those mappings and feed them into the Palo Alto. So it is not necessarily an official Palo Alto-driven thing to do that, but will it happen one day? I believe it probably will. As to when it would, I don't know. So, but what you would do for the Palo is it would give you a similar piece of functionality in terms of you can send the ICE contextual data about who the user is via syslogs, radius accounting logs, into the Palo Alto. So the Palo can sort of parse those source IPs and users into a readable format, and you can make user decisions based on that. So is it a MAB? Well, if you were to say, I'm going to match this identity, which would come across as the MAC address in your Palo Alto for the identity, well, you could use that to allow it to only a particular website, but it would not be the actual tag data. Does that make sense? Dan, does that help? So TLDR, you can do that, but not with pxgrid and tags. You gotta tackle that in a different way. So once we grab a Monica source tag, we're going to say she gets decrypted. Now, why do I think this is important? Because sometimes if you're trying to block social media, it's important to really get deep into the session to know what they're doing, and that's when I would say this kind of setting for Monica when we're trying to implement this access policy is particularly important. Now we'll go, and then if I'm going to write a policy that says don't decrypt executives, it'll be the same process. And firepower here is not more responsive. Shane has a question. For an existing WSA shop that is doing decryption and access policy based on AD group membership, what would the selling point for executives justify ICE tags in lieu or in addition of AD group memberships or policy? A question mark, better granularity. The answer, Shane, is it will be more granular for an organization like you guys in that you can get better information about what the device is from the tag. Because based on the profile, you can say, I'm going to apply this tag to their mobile devices versus this tag to their laptops and provide a different policy. The other thing is if you're doing Active Directory group memberships with WSA without the without pxgrid, you're doing one of two things. One is you're doing CDA. CDA meaning the context directory agent from Cisco, so you can pull AD logs. That does not and will not support AD 2016, so you're kind of stuck at AD 2012, or you're doing browser auth. And there's, God bless browser auth for all the good that it's done a lot of people. No one really likes it, right? There's no reason for us to actually want to use it going forward. So I would say you'll also have a better user experience without browser auth. So if you have pain points there and you're looking for a selling point, I would definitely use, getting rid of the browser authentication issues, more granularity, and it's simply just a tighter integration. It can be easier to use. rather than doing everything natively in WSA. Not that you couldn't do everything in WSA like you're doing today. I just think it's a better deployment to use the metadata you guys are getting. So it is 11:40. I always like to leave some time at the end for additional questions. I'm going to finish clicking through the no decrypt for executive policy here. And let me just throw in a web filter, because you can do this for a particular URL category also. It doesn't have to be globally per group. So we'll just exempt the executive tag for social media for decryption. Use global settings. And I'll just say monitor those guys. Submit. All right, I got one from Monica from Shane. Does the new version of TLS have any impact on the scenario discussed in the presentation? My understanding is that as long as WSA certificate is trusted by the client browser, the impact of TLS will be minimal to non-existent, but interested if there's any caveats. So I am not aware of any specific TLS 1.3 caveats. I am curious as to the implementation of TLS 1.3 across the different manufacturers. And I say that because if we actually look in like the HTTPS proxy here in WSA, you'll notice that I don't actually think that it knows how to do TLS 1.3 yet. So a lot of these devices are going to kind of have to down rev TLS when you're doing this. So also like Firepower, I factually know will not support TLS 1.3 yet. Palo Alto is, I believe, just starting to. Yeah, there's not even a way to configure TLS 1.2 or 1.3, but I know this will not support 1.3. I was just starting to support 1.3. So how will it impact? You know, first of all, we need these guys to support 1.3, and then what will happen is if a website requires us to have 1.3, we'll want to make sure everything is fully compatible and baked. But otherwise, the impact of the protocol, I don't believe it'll be a significant impact. I see a much bigger impact for things like Quick. So that would be the protocol that Chrome uses natively for Google websites and other websites that use Google hosting. That could be a much bigger challenge because it's using UDP over TCP and otherwise cannot do a TLS decryption on. But I'm not thinking TLS 1.3 is going to be a big deal. 1.3 I expect will be more efficient and more secure, sort of just an overall better implementation of 1.2. HSTS is sort of a different animal. If HSTS is required on a lot of websites where man-in-the-middle attacks like SSL Decrypt are precluded, that could be a big deal. But I believe most people, web operators, if they're going to say, I want people to connect to my website at work, and web operators certainly know that corporations want to do SSL decrypts, they're going to allow that kind of thing to happen, right? But if you have a particular website that you're operating and you say, you know, I don't actually care about what a company thinks, I'm going to be loyal to my user, you know, HSTS might be something that they're going to end up turning on and prevent man-in-the-middle attack. But I hope that's kind of a roundabout answer, Shane. But TLDRs, I don't expect it to be a major impact in any scenario specifically here. So it is 11:44. I got 1 minute left. I just want to thank all of you guys for joining here. I'm going to stick around for a couple of minutes if anybody wants to ask some questions or try to click through anything else in the scenarios involved. Otherwise, I'll let Monica do her outro here.
Great. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. If you'd like to get a copy of the recording, please feel free to email us at techtalk@presidio.com. As Andy said, he'll stick around for a minute. If you'd like to unmute yourself and ask some questions, please feel free. Otherwise, have a great day, and we hope you can join us next month. Take care.
Well, somebody's got to have a question. Barber, you got to have one. Call you out by name, kid.